Get off my plane. You don't belong up here. The words didn't come out as a request. They came out as a verdict handed down from a great height by a man who had never once in his life been told no. He said them loudly. He said them slowly. He said them so that every passenger in the cabin of Meridian Global Flight 214 could hear exactly who he was talking to and exactly what he thought of her. Roland Ashford stood in the aisle of the first-class cabin 35,000 feet above the black Atlantic, pointing one thick finger at the woman seated calmly beside his assigned seat. His face was flushed a deep shade of red. His voice carried the confidence of a man who assumed the entire world had been arranged for his comfort. And to him, the woman in seat 3B was not a person. She was an inconvenience, a problem to be removed. Someone who, in his mind, had simply wandered into the wrong part of the plane and needed to be shown the door. He expected the crew to obey him. He expected her to shrink, to apologize, to gather her things and disappear toward the back of the aircraft where he believed she belonged. He expected, above all, to win. Because in Roland Ashford's experience, men like him always won, and women like her always moved. What he did not expect was the 6 calm words she would eventually say. He did not expect that in under an hour those 6 words would not just end his trip to London. They would unravel his career, his marriage, his fortune, and his name, piece by piece, until nothing of the life he had built remained standing. Before we get into this story, I want to hear from you. Comment down below and tell me what city, what country, what corner of the world you're watching from right now. And if you believe that the way a person is treated should never depend on the color of their skin or the clothes on their back, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because stories like this one deserve to be seen by as many people as possible. Now let's rewind a few hours back to a crowded airport terminal, back to the moment before anyone knew who the quiet woman in the gray hoodie really was. Let's rewind to how it all started. The chaos of the airport's international terminal was a kind of music, if you knew how to listen to it. Rolling suitcase wheels clattering across polished floors, boarding announcements layered over one another in 3 languages, the hiss of espresso machines, the rise and fall of 1,000 conversations, the occasional wail of an overtired child. To most people, it was noise. To Amara Ellison, it was information. She sat near the wide bank of windows at gate B26, a paper cup of black coffee cooling in her hand, watching it all with the quiet attention of a woman who had learned long ago that the most valuable thing a person could do was pay attention. She wore graphite gray trousers, soft and unremarkable, a charcoal cashmere hoodie, expensive if you knew fabric, invisible if you didn't, a pair of worn leather loafers that had molded themselves to her feet over years of travel. Her hair was pulled back into a simple, elegant bun. The only jewelry she wore was a plain watch, the kind that told time and nothing else. She carried no designer handbag, just a well-used leather satchel with a laptop and a notebook inside. To the strangers moving past her, Amara Ellison was no one in particular, a tired traveler, a woman in comfortable clothes waiting for a flight. And that anonymity, that gift of being overlooked, was the single most useful tool she owned. Because Amara Ellison was the founder, chief executive, and majority owner of Meridian Global Airways, one of the largest and most respected airlines in the world. She was 44 years old. She had built the company over 2 decades, growing it from a small regional carrier that everyone had written off into an international powerhouse with planes in the sky over 6 continents. She had done it through long nights and hard decisions, and a stubbornness that her own board members sometimes cursed and sometimes praised. She had done it, above all, by refusing to believe that the way things had always been done was the way they had to stay. And every few months she did something that made her security team nervous and her assistants sigh. She flew incognito. She would dress down. She would book herself under a quiet reservation on one of her own flagship routes, the crown jewels of her airline, the flights that appeared in the glossy advertisements and the awards, and she would travel as an ordinary passenger, not a chief executive in a tailored suit escorted through private lounges, just a woman with a satchel and a boarding pass. She did it for one reason. She wanted to see the cracks. Any executive could read a report. Any executive could sit in a boardroom and nod along to a slideshow full of customer satisfaction scores and on-time performance charts. But Amara had learned that reports lied. Not on purpose, usually. They lied by leaving things out. They couldn't capture the way a gate agent's smile turned brittle when the line got long. They couldn't measure whether the priority and priority boarding meant anything at all. They couldn't tell her whether the warmth her company promised in its commercials was real when no one important was watching, or whether it evaporated the moment a passenger looked like they didn't matter. So she watched. She watched how the staff treated the people who couldn't do anything for them. The mother, traveling alone with 2 kids, the elderly man confused about his gate, the young person in a hoodie and sneakers who didn't look like the airline's carefully art-directed idea of a first-class traveler. Tonight she was flying Flight 214 from the East Coast to London, one of her most important routes and one she was quietly proud of. She had settled into her window seat at the gate, so to speak, mentally, and was letting the terminal reveal itself to her. She noted the gate agent, a young woman with a neat ponytail and a name tag that read Chloe, handling a delay with practiced patience. She noted the boarding lanes, the signage, the small human details that added up to whether a person felt respected or processed. And then she heard him before she saw him. "This is completely unacceptable. Do you understand me, unacceptable?" The voice cut across the gate area like a blade, loud, entitled, pitched to be heard. Amara didn't turn her head right away. She just listened. "I have been a top-tier member of this airline for 11 years, the voice went on. 11 years. And you're telling me the flight is delayed, on top of a lounge that served me coffee that tasted like it was brewed in a parking lot. Do you have any idea how much I pay for the privilege of being here?" Now Amara looked. The man was tall and broad-dressed in a suit that had clearly been expensive and clearly been chosen a size too small so that it strained across his shoulders and made him look perpetually on the verge of bursting. His face was ruddy, his jaw set in the particular way of a man who confused volume with authority. In one hand he held up a card, a sleek platinum and diamond thing that caught the fluorescent light. It was the airline's most exclusive tier, an invitation-only status, reserved for the highest spenders. His name, Amara would learn soon enough, was Roland Ashford. The gate agent Chloe held her composure beautifully. "I completely understand your frustration, Mr. Ashford," she said. "I do apologize. It's a brief mechanical check, nothing serious, and we'll have you boarding very shortly. You'll be among the first aboard, I promise you that." "You'd better be sorry," Roland sneered, snatching the card back from where he'd been waving it. "I pay more for my membership in a single year than you'll earn in 3. The least I expect in return is that things run on time." Amara felt something tighten quietly in her chest. That card, that elite tier he was brandishing like a weapon, was her creation. She had designed it years ago as a way to thank the passengers who flew with her most lows, who trusted her company with their business and their time. It was meant to be a gesture of gratitude, a thank you. It was never, ever meant to be a club that a man could swing at a young gate agent doing her best on a difficult night. Roland paced back and forth in front of the gate, huffing, checking his gold watch every few seconds, shooting irritated glances at the other waiting passengers, as though they were personally responsible for the delay. His gaze swept over Amara, lingered for a half-second on her hoodie and her loafers, and her plain satchel dismissed her as beneath his notice, and moved on. She recognized that look. She had spent a lifetime being on the receiving end of it. The quick scan, the instant verdict, the filing away of a human being into the category of doesn't matter. Most people never even knew they did it. It was as automatic as breathing. Amara took a slow sip of her cooling coffee and said nothing. She simply watched and waited and let the man reveal exactly who he was, because in her experience, people always did. We'd now like to invite our top-tier members and first-class passengers to begin boarding Flight 214 to London. The announcement had barely finished before Roland Ashford was on his feet and shoving his way toward the front of the line, dragging a hard-sided roller bag behind him with enough force that it clipped the ankle of a woman standing nearby. He didn't apologize. He didn't seem to notice. He simply planted himself at the head of the boarding lane, as though the position were his by natural right. Amara rose unhurriedly from her seat by the window. She tucked her notebook into her satchel, slung the strap over her shoulder, and joined the line a few passengers behind him. She was in no rush. She had learned the value of moving slowly, of watching the room, of never letting anyone see her hurry. As the line inched forward, Roland handed his boarding pass to Chloe at the podium. The scanner chirped. He didn't say thank you. He simply grunted and stepped through toward the jet bridge. But as he did, he glanced back over his shoulder, and his eyes landed on Amara moving up behind him in the same premium lane. His lip curled. She could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the same tired arithmetic she'd seen 1,000 times. A woman in a gray hoodie and worn loafers, no designer bag, no obvious markers of wealth, standing in the line reserved for first class and elite members. In his mind, it did not add up. In his mind, she was in the wrong place. "First class only, sweetheart," he muttered just loudly enough for her to hear, just quietly enough to pretend he hadn't meant her to. "You'll want the other line." Amara did not answer. She did not slow down. She stepped up to the podium, lifted her own boarding pass, and let the scanner do the talking. The light flashed green. Chloe looked up, read the name on her screen, and gave a small, warm, professional nod. "Enjoy your flight," she said. Amara offered a quiet nod in return, and walked past Roland Ashford onto the jet bridge, her loafers silent on the carpet, her satchel swinging gently at her side. Behind her, she could hear his footsteps, heavy and disbelieving, and she could almost feel the confusion radiating off him. He had been so certain. He had been so completely, comfortably certain that she didn't belong, and the little green light had just contradicted him. It clearly bothered him more than the delay had. She let it bother him. The jet bridge opened into the hushed, plush world of the first-class cabin. Soft, golden lighting, the faint smell of leather and fresh coffee, and something floral. Rows of self-contained seat pods, each one a private little suite with its own sliding partition, its own screen, its own pool of quiet. It was, Amara thought, with a small flicker of pride she allowed herself only rarely, a genuinely beautiful cabin. Her team had designed every inch of it. She had personally argued for the wider aisles and the softer lighting, and the little touches that made a long flight feel less like endurance and more like rest. At the cabin door, a flight attendant greeted her with a smile that reached all the way to her eyes. She was a woman in her late 40s with kind features and the unhurried competence of someone who had done this job for a very long time. Her name tag read Brenda. "Welcome aboard," Brenda said warmly. "Ms. Ellison, is that right?" "Amara is fine," she replied gently. "Thank you, Brenda. You're in 3B, the window side. Can I take your coat for you or hang anything up?" "Just the satchel is coming with me," Amara said with a small smile. "But thank you." She moved down the aisle to her pod, 3B, and slid into the seat. It was every bit as comfortable as she remembered from the design sessions, the leather soft and cool, the seat cradling her without swallowing her. She stowed her satchel, settled in, and let out a slow breath. For a moment, just a moment, she was simply a tired woman at the start of a long flight, grateful to sit down. The moment didn't last. Roland Ashford came lumbering down the aisle, his roller bag banging against the pods as he went, and stopped at 3A, the seat directly beside hers. He looked at the seat number, he looked at Amara, he looked at the seat number again, and his already flushed face deepened to a shade somewhere between plum and thundercloud. He had, it seemed, just discovered that the woman he'd sneered at in the boarding line was going to be his seatmate for the next 7 hours across the ocean. Amara looked up and met his eyes, calm and even. "Good evening," she said. Roland did not say good evening. Roland stood frozen in the aisle, staring down at her with an expression of pure, undisguised distaste, as though the airline had made not a scheduling decision but a moral error. And Amara, watching him, understood with a weary certainty that the evening was not going to be a quiet one after all. "No," Roland said, shaking his head slowly. "No, this isn't right. There's been a mistake." He remained standing in the aisle, blocking it, one hand gripping the edge of the pod as he looked from the seat number to Amara and back again. Other passengers filing in behind him had to stop and wait, luggage in hand, while he refused to move. "I'm sorry," Amara said mildly. "This is my seat area," he said, gesturing at 3A and then at her in 3B, as though the two seats were a single unit that had been unjustly divided. "My colleague is supposed to be flying with me. He's booked in 3B, so there's clearly been some kind of error because you're sitting in his seat." Amara had checked the manifest before the flight the way she always did on these incognito trips, a habit she couldn't shake. She knew for a fact that the seat next to her 3A was booked under the name Roland Ashford, and that 3B was booked under her own quiet reservation. There was no colleague. There was no error. There was only a man who had decided she didn't belong and was now reverse engineering a reason. "I don't believe there's been a mistake," she said calmly. "But I'm happy to let the crew confirm." Flight attendant Roland barked, snapping his fingers in the air. Flight attendant Brenda came down the aisle quickly, her expression shifting into the practiced calm of a professional bracing for a difficult passenger. "Mr. Ashford," she said, "is everything right?" "No, it is not all right," Roland said, jabbing a finger toward Amara. "This woman is in my colleague's seat. He's supposed to be in 3B. I need her moved." Brenda glanced at the tablet in her hand, tapping through the seat map. "Sir, I'm showing you in 3A, and Ms. Ellison here is confirmed in 3B. Both seats are correctly assigned. There's no third passenger listed in this row." "That's impossible," Roland snapped. "Check it again. She probably—" He paused, and his eyes raked over Amara's hoodie, her loafers, her plain satchel, and whatever ugly thought had been forming in his mind finished itself out loud. "She probably found some way to get herself in here. Look at her. Does she look like she belongs in first class to you?" The words landed in the cabin like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples spread. A few pods away, a woman in her 30s with dark hair and a paperback in her lap looked up sharply. Her name was Sophia Herrera, and she frowned deeply, her disapproval plain on her face. Across the aisle, an elderly woman named Margaret Doyle, silver-haired and dignified in seat 1C, turned in her seat to see what was happening, her brow furrowing. And a young businessman named Ethan Cole, seated nearby with a newspaper, slowly lowered the paper to reveal an expression of dawning discomfort. And a few rows back, a man named Mateo Reyes, a travel and technology blogger in his late 20s, quietly slipped his phone from his pocket, angled it toward the aisle, and began without a word to record. Amara noticed all of it. She noticed the witnesses gathering, the way the cabin's attention was slowly turning like a tide. But she kept her focus on the man in front of her, and she kept her voice perfectly level. "Sir," she said, "this is my assigned seat. I'm a paying passenger the same as you." Paying Roland repeated and let out a short, ugly laugh. "I highly doubt that. You probably got some kind of discount or a giveaway, or maybe you know somebody on the crew." He waved a dismissive hand. "One way or another, you're not who this cabin is for, Mr. Ashford," Brenda said, her voice tightening. "That's not appropriate. This is Ms. Ellison's seat, and I'd ask you to please lower your voice." "Don't tell me to lower my voice," Roland said, and his volume rose to prove the point, filling the entire first-class cabin, now bouncing off the curved walls. Every conversation in the cabin had stopped, every face had turned. "I am one of this airline's most valuable customers, 11 years at the top tier, and I am telling you I will not sit next to someone like her for 7 hours across the ocean. It's absurd. She is making me uncomfortable, and I want her moved." Someone like her. There it was. The phrase he had been circling the whole time finally said out loud, and everyone in the cabin heard it, and everyone in the cabin understood exactly what he meant by it. Margaret Doyle's mouth pressed into a thin, hard line. Sophia Herrera set her paperback down entirely. Mateo Reyes kept filming, his hand steady now, his jaw tight. Amara sat very still. Inside her, something old and familiar was stirring, a heat she had learned over decades to hold in check, to press down and channel into something more useful than rage. She did not raise her voice. She did not stand. She simply looked at Roland Ashford with a calm that, had he been paying closer attention, might have frightened him. But he wasn't paying attention. He thought he was winning. Someone like her. The words hung in the recycled cabin air, and for a moment, just a single suspended moment, Amara Ellison was not 44 years old. She was not a billionaire. She was not the owner of the aircraft she was sitting in with 100,000 employees who depended on her decisions. For a moment, she was 26 again. She could feel it as clearly as if it were yesterday, the way certain wounds never fully close, but only wait quiet for the right words to press against them. 26, a junior financial analyst at a firm that barely paid her enough to cover rent, flying standby on a rare business trip because it was the cheapest fare her company would approve. She had waited at the gate for hours, and when a single first-class seat had opened up and the agent, in a moment of routine kindness, had offered it to her as a standby upgrade, she had felt briefly like the whole world had tilted in her favor. She remembered walking down that jet bridge, her heart light, her cheap suit pressed as neatly as she could manage. She remembered the flight attendant looking at her boarding pass, then at her face, then back at the pass, and saying with a small, confused frown, "I'm sorry, are you sure this is right? This is a first-class seat." She remembered the way her joy had curdled into shame. She remembered standing in the aisle while the attendant called a colleague over, the two of them murmuring, glancing at her, checking and rechecking, while three men in business suits boarded and settled into their own first-class seats, without a single question, without a single glance, without anyone asking if they were sure. She remembered being made to wait standing, holding her bag, her face burning, while the whole cabin watched, until finally, grudgingly, they let her sit in the seat that had been hers all along. And she remembered that the seat, once she finally sank into it, hadn't felt like a gift anymore. It had felt like a courtroom she'd barely been acquitted in. She had not cried on that flight. She had promised herself she wouldn't, and she hadn't. But somewhere over the middle of the country, staring out the window at the clouds, she had made herself a different kind of promise. A vow quiet and fierce, the kind of vow that ends up shaping an entire life. One day she had told herself, "No one is going to decide where I belong just by looking at me. And one day, I'm going to build a place where that never happens to anyone else." That vow had not made her smaller. It had not made her bitter, though it had every right to. Instead, it had made her sharp. It had made her patient. It had made her relentless. It had made her stay up late learning everything there was to know about an industry that hadn't wanted her. It had made her save and borrow and gamble and build year after year, decision after decision, until the small regional airline everyone had dismissed became Meridian Global, and the woman everyone had overlooked became the person whose name was on the door. Every seat in this cabin existed because of that vow. Every wide aisle, every kind word in the training manuals she had personally rewritten, every promise the company made about dignity and welcome. She had built all of it on the foundation of a single, humiliating night when she was 26, and someone decided she didn't look like she belonged. And now here it was again. The same look, the same tone, the same assumption, wearing a different face in a different decade, sitting in a seat she had designed on a plane she owned, telling her that she did not belong. The heat in her chest settled into something cold and clear. She was not going to move. Not because of the money, not because of the principle in the abstract, but because of the 26-year-old who had stood in that aisle with her face burning and sworn it would never happen again. She owed that young woman this. She owed her the refusal. Amara drew a slow breath, and when she looked up at Roland Ashford, her eyes were perfectly steady. "I really don't think I'm going to move," Amara said quietly. Roland's face twisted. "Excuse me? I said I don't think I'm going to move. This is my seat. I've done nothing wrong, and I'd ask you to sit down so the other passengers can finish boarding." For a moment, Roland seemed genuinely stunned that she had refused him. Then his stunned expression hardened into fury, and he turned the full force of it on Brenda. "Are you hearing this?" he demanded. "This is your job. I am a top-tier member, and I am telling you that I am not comfortable, and you are going to do something about it. Move her. Put her in the back. Put her in economy. I don't care where she goes, but she is not sitting next to me, and if you can't handle that, then I will be speaking to your supervisor, and to corporate, and to whoever else it takes to make sure you are not working these flights anymore. Do you understand me?" And there it was. The threat. The real weapon, the one he'd been carrying the whole time behind the platinum card and the too-tight suit. Not his money. His power to end someone's livelihood with a single complaint. Brenda's composure faltered. Amara watched it happen, watched the calculation flicker across the older woman's face, and her heart sank, because she understood it completely. Brenda had been doing this job for 19 years. She had 2 decades of experience, a spotless record, a life built on this paycheck. And she knew, with the bone-deep certainty of anyone who has worked in service, exactly how much damage a furious top-tier passenger could do. A single formal complaint from a man like Roland Ashford could ground her for weeks, could follow her, could put her whole career at risk over a version of events he would tell however he wanted. Brenda was afraid, and in her fear she made the wrong choice. She turned to Amara and her voice came out soft and pleading. "Ma'am," she said, "I am so sorry about all of this, I truly am. But we do actually have a lovely seat available a little further back. A window seat, very comfortable, and I'd be happy to move you there and bring you a complimentary—" She didn't finish because Amara was looking at her now with an expression that stopped the words in her throat. It wasn't anger, it was something worse. It was disappointment, deep and quiet, the disappointment of a person watching the very thing she had spent her life trying to prevent happen right in front of her. "So that's it?" Amara said, her voice dangerously gentle. "You're going to remove a paying, ticketed passenger from her assigned seat, not because she did anything wrong, not because she broke any rule, but because another passenger has decided he doesn't like the way she looks, and he's louder than she is, and he has a shinier card. Is that what's happening here, Brenda?" Brenda's mouth opened and closed. "Ma'am, I'm just trying to keep the peace. I'm trying to de-escalate the situation." "The way to de-escalate this situation," Amara said, "is not to reward the man who created it. But you already know that. It's in the training. I'd bet my life it's in the training. I want to pause here for just a second because I need to ask you something. If you were sitting in that cabin watching this unfold, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up? Would you have kept your head down and stared at your tray table like most people do? It's easy to know the right answer when you're watching a screen. It's a lot harder at 35,000 feet with everyone watching. Let me know in the comments what you think you'd do. And if this story is pulling you in, go ahead and hit that like button so more people can find it. Now back to the cabin where Roland Ashford had run entirely out of patience. "Enough of this," he snarled. He stepped closer, looming over Amara's pod. "I've had enough. It's very simple. It's me or her. I am not flying on this plane if she is on it. So you make your choice right now, and you get her off this plane, or I promise you every single person involved in this is going to regret it. Get her off." The cabin had gone completely silent. Somewhere behind them, Mateo Reyes's phone was still recording, capturing every word. Margaret Doyle had one trembling hand pressed to her chest. Sofia Herrera looked like she was about to rise from her seat. Brenda stood frozen between the furious man and the calm woman trapped, her tablet clutched to her chest like a shield that could not possibly protect her. And Amara Ellison, at the very center of the storm, finally began to rise from her seat. "You want me off this plane?" Amara said softly as she stood. She rose to her full height, unhurried, until she was standing eye to eye with Roland Ashford in the narrow aisle. She was not a small woman, and she did not shrink from him. Her expression was calm, her hands loose at her sides, her voice quiet enough that the entire cabin had to lean in to hear it, which meant the entire cabin did. "Yes," Roland said, thrown for just a second by her stillness before his bravado came roaring back. "Yes, that is exactly what I want. Finally, off, now." The cabin held its breath. Brenda took a small step back. Mateo Reyes adjusted his grip on his phone, making sure he had the shot. Every eye in first class was fixed on the woman in the gray hoodie and the red-faced man towering over her, waiting to see what she would do, expecting perhaps tears or a plea or a defeated collection of her bag. Amara looked at him for a long, quiet moment. And then she said the 6 words. "I am not getting off this plane." The words were not shouted. They were not even raised. They were spoken with the flat, immovable calm of a woman stating a simple fact, the way you might state that the sky is dark or the ocean is deep. And in the silence of the cabin they carried like a bell. She let them settle. And then, because he had pushed her to it, because he had stood in front of 100 witnesses and told her she didn't belong in the place she had built with her own 2 hands, she added the 7 that detonated everything. "Because I own this airline." For a full 5 seconds, the only sound in the cabin was the soft, distant whir of the aircraft's systems. Roland Ashford stared at her. His face had frozen into a mask of pure, contemptuous disbelief. And then something in him cracked, and he exploded not into anger this time, but into laughter. Loud, barking, derisive laughter that echoed off the curved walls of the cabin. You, he wheezed, actually clutching his stomach. You own Meridian Global. Oh, that is the best thing I have heard in years. That is genuinely spectacular. He turned around to face the other passengers, spreading his arms wide, inviting them to share in the joke. Did everyone hear that? Did you all hear it? This woman, he gestured up and down at her hoodie and her loafers, says she owns the airline. What's next, sweetheart? Are you going to tell us you're the Queen of England too? Should we all bow? He laughed, and nobody laughed with him. That was the thing he didn't notice, so drunk was he on his own performance. Not a single other passenger was laughing. Margaret Doyle was watching him with open contempt. Sofia Herrera's face was cold and still. And Mateo Reyes was filming every second of it, capturing the exact moment a man made a fool of himself in front of the entire world, without yet knowing that was what he was doing. Amara did not flinch. She did not smile. She simply stood there and let him laugh himself out, her expression as calm and unreadable as still water. She had been braced for this too. The disbelief. The ridicule. It was, in its own way, the more revealing part. Any fool could be rude to a stranger. It took a special kind of arrogance to be told the truth and laugh in its face. But someone else in the cabin was not laughing. Someone else had gone very, very pale. Brenda Callahan was staring at Amara, and the blood had drained from her face, and it was not because she believed the impossible claim. It was because of the name, Ellison. She had said it herself at the cabin door, Ms. Ellison. And somewhere in the back of Brenda's mind, a door was slowly, horrifyingly beginning to open. The founder of Meridian Global, the man who had started it all decades ago, his name had been Ellison. And the current chief executive, the famously private woman whose face almost never appeared in the press, the owner who was rumored to fly her own routes in disguise to keep her staff honest. Brenda's hand rose slowly to cover her mouth. Roland was still chuckling, wiping an imaginary tear from his eye. I own this airline, he repeated to himself, shaking his head. Priceless. Absolutely priceless. He looked at Amara with a smug, satisfied grin, certain he had put her in her place, certain the joke had ended the matter. Now sit down somewhere else before you embarrass yourself any further. Amara turned her calm gaze from him to the flight attendant standing frozen a few feet away. Brenda, she said quietly, I think it's time we cleared this up. Ms. Ellison? Brenda whispered. Oh my, it's you. It's actually you, isn't it? Amara didn't answer right away. Instead, she did something that made the whole cabin lean in. Something that changed the temperature of the room from ridicule to unease in the space of a single breath. She looked at Brenda and she said, Your name is Brenda Callahan. Your employee number is 6120. You've been with this company for 19 years. You're normally based out of a different airport, but you picked up this route because of the overtime pay. You have 2 children, both in college right now, which is not cheap, and I know it isn't. You are by every measure I have ever seen an excellent flight attendant. Your service scores are among the highest in the fleet. Passengers request you by name. She paused. Am I wrong about any of that? Brenda's jaw had dropped. Her hand flew back to her mouth. How do you know all that? She breathed. Because it's my job to know, Amara said softly. Every person who wears this uniform matters to me. That's not a slogan, it's the whole reason I built this company. She held Brenda's gaze steady and not unkind. Now I need you to do something for me. On that tablet in your hands, I want you to open the internal company directory, the executive listing, and I want you to look up the chief executive officer right now in front of everyone. Roland's laughter had finally completely died. He stood in the aisle with a flicker of confusion crossing his ruddy features, the first crack in his certainty. What is this? He said. What is this, some kind of trick, some kind of... Please, Brenda, Amara said, ignoring him entirely. Brenda's fingers were trembling so badly she could barely work the screen. She tapped through to the employee portal to the executive directory and typed the first few letters of the name. E-L-L. The system loaded for a moment that stretched out unbearably long, and then the profile appeared. The official corporate photograph of the chief executive officer of Meridian Global Airways filled the screen. It was her. The same face, the same high cheekbones, the same steady, intelligent eyes, the same woman who was standing right there in the aisle in a plain gray hoodie, looking back at Brenda with quiet patience. In the photo, she wore a tailored suit and her hair was styled differently, but there was not a shred of doubt. It was Amara Ellison. Owner. Founder's daughter. The person whose signature was on every paycheck in the company. Brenda made a small, strangled sound. The tablet slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the galley floor. She didn't even bend to pick it up. She just stared at Amara with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. The horror of a person realizing the full scale of a mistake in a single, sickening instant. "Miss Ellison," she whispered, her voice cracking apart. "Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry. I never met—" "It's all right," Brenda Amara said, though her tone had gone cool. "We'll talk. But right now I need you to go and get the captain. Please, bring him here." Yes, ma'am, right away." Brenda practically fled up the aisle toward the cockpit, swiping her card with shaking hands, disappearing through the door. The cabin was so silent now it felt like the air itself had thickened. Mateo Reyes was still filming his hand, no longer quite steady, because even he could feel the enormity of what he was capturing. And Roland Ashford stood alone in the aisle, his bravado gone, his face gone from red to a sickly, chalky pale. What he said, what is happening? What did she— That's not— He looked around the cabin as if searching for someone to tell him it was all still a joke, and found only the cold, contemptuous stares of people who had watched him humiliate a woman he now understood he had badly, catastrophically misjudged. "This is a prank," he said weakly. "Someone set this up. This isn't real." Amara said nothing. She simply held his gaze, and the silence was more devastating than any words could have been. A moment later, the cockpit door opened, and Captain Daniel Voss stepped out, followed by Brenda, who looked like she might faint. The captain was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, gray at the temples, with the unflappable demeanor of someone who had spent 30 years handling emergencies at altitude. He looked frankly annoyed at having been pulled from his final checks. "All right," he said, his voice a low rumble. "What is the situation? We have a departure slot to make." Roland, spotting an authority figure, felt his confidence surge back one last, doomed time. "Captain," he said, striding toward him, "thank goodness. This woman," he pointed at Amara, "is harassing me. She's delusional. She's been claiming that she owns the airline, if you can believe it, and she's refusing to move out of a seat that isn't even hers. I want her removed, and I want it done now." Captain Voss looked at Amara. He didn't recognize her. He frowned slightly, taking in the hoodie and the loafers, and then he turned to Brenda. "Brenda. What's going on here? Who is this passenger?" Brenda, tears standing in her eyes, could barely get the words out. She lifted one shaking hand and pointed at Amara. "Sir," she said, that is Ms. Ellison. That's our chief executive. That's the owner." Captain Daniel Voss's face went through 3 distinct changes in the span of 2 seconds. First, annoyance, then confusion, and then a dawning, thunderstruck comprehension so complete that it looked as though he'd been physically struck. He had been on the company-wide leadership video call just the week before. He had seen her face on the screen addressing thousands of employees. He knew exactly who she was. His entire posture changed. His shoulders squared. He straightened his uniform jacket with one reflexive tug. "Ms. Ellison," he said, and his voice had gone crisp and formal and deeply respectful. "My sincere apologies. I had no idea you were aboard this flight. How can I be of service?" And Roland Ashford's entire world stopped. "What did you just call her?" Roland's voice came out as a whisper, thin and cracked, all the bluster drained out of it. He staggered back half a step, one hand groping for the edge of a seat pod to steady himself. The blood had left his face so completely he looked gray. "No," he said. No. That's not— She can't be. Look at her. She's—" He stopped himself, but everyone in the cabin heard the shape of what he'd been about to say. "She's dressed too simply. She doesn't look the part. She's not what a person in charge is supposed to look like. She's what Mr. Ashford Amara asked." Her voice was quiet, but it had an edge to it now, cold and clean as ice. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Amara turned to the captain. "Captain Voss," she said. This passenger, Mr. Roland Ashford, has spent the last 15 minutes creating a hostile environment in this cabin. He has used demeaning and prejudiced language toward me. He has threatened a member of your crew with the loss of her job, and he has refused every reasonable attempt to resolve the situation calmly. In my judgment, he is not fit to travel on this flight. I want him removed from the aircraft. Understood, Ms. Ellison, Captain Voss said without hesitation. Consider it done. The reversal was so total, so sudden and absolute that it seemed to leave a physical aftershock in the air. Roland's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before the words came tumbling out in a desperate rush. Wait, please. This is a misunderstanding, that's all it is. I was stressed. The delay, the coffee, I hadn't eaten, I wasn't thinking clearly. I didn't mean any of it, please. I have a meeting in London. It's important. It's the most important meeting of my year. I have to be on this flight. You should have thought about your meeting, Amara said, before you decided to publicly humiliate a stranger you'd never met, based on nothing but the color of her skin and the price of her clothes. She held his eyes. You said someone like her. You said I didn't belong. Those weren't slips of the tongue, Mr. Ashford. Those were choices. And now you get to live with them. Please, he begged, and there was something almost pitiful in it now. This large, loud man reduced to pleading. He clasped his hands together. Ms. Ellison, I'm sorry. I am genuinely, deeply sorry. Give me another chance. I'll sit in the back. I'll sit anywhere. I'll say nothing for the entire flight. Just please don't do this. Amara looked at him for a long moment, and then she turned to the captain. Please have airport security meet us at the gate, she said. And there's one more thing. She turned back to Roland, and her voice was quiet and final. Your top-tier membership, the card you've been waving in people's faces all evening, is revoked, effective immediately. Your accumulated miles, your privileges, your access to our lounges, all of it gone. And as of this moment, you are permanently banned from flying Meridian Global Airways for the rest of your life. The finality of it hit Roland like a physical blow, harder even than the removal itself. It wasn't just the flight, it was the status, the very thing he had used as a weapon all evening, the card he had brandished, the membership he had lorded over a young gate agent, the identity he had wrapped himself in. It was being stripped from him in front of everyone, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. You can't do this, he said, and his voice climbed toward panic. I spend a fortune with this airline. Do you have any idea how much money You can't just... I'll sue. I'll sue every last one of you. This is discrimination against me. You set me up. You sat there in that hoodie and you set me up. No, Mr. Ashford, Amara said. I sat there in a hoodie and gave you every opportunity to treat a fellow human being with basic decency. That was the only test. And you failed it loudly in front of everyone entirely on your own. 2 airport security officers already stationed at the gate because of the earlier delay appeared at the cabin door within moments of the captain's call. Their faces were grave. Mr. Ashford, one of them said, we need you to come with us now. Please gather your belongings quietly. This is an outrage, Roland tried to shout, but his voice had gone thin and reedy, all the power leached out of it. He yanked his roller bag down from the overhead bin. As the officers flanked him, he was walked slowly down the aisle past the silent, staring passengers of the first-class cabin, past Margaret Doyle, who watched him go without a flicker of sympathy, past Mateo Reyes, whose phone tracked his every step. At the cabin door, he turned back one last time, his face contorted. You haven't heard the last of this, he spat. And then he was gone. The cabin remained silent for a long beat. Then Amara Ellison let out a slow, controlled breath and turned to face the passengers, all of whom were watching her now with something like awe. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice warm again, the ice gone. My name is Amara Ellison. I'm the founder and owner of this airline, and I am so sorry that you had to witness that tonight. It's not who we are. It's not who I will ever allow us to be. As a small token of my apology for the disturbance and the delay, every passenger on this flight will receive a full refund and 75,000 bonus miles. The bar is open, the crew will take excellent care of you, and I hope you'll try to enjoy the rest of your evening. There was a smattering of applause, then more, and then the whole cabin was applauding quietly and sincerely. Amara gave a small nod, and then she turned to Brenda and Captain Voss, and her expression grew serious again. Brenda, Captain, When we land, I'd like to see you both." Then she slid back into seat 3B and pulled the privacy partition closed. And alone for just a moment, with no one watching, she let the calm mask fall from her face. She was not shaking. She was not crying. But she was furious. More furious than she had been in years, and it was not only at Roland Ashford. She was furious that her own crew, her own carefully trained, deeply valued crew, had been so ready to fold. That her own company had somehow taught a 19-year veteran that a shiny card was worth more than her own judgment. That the promise she had built Meridian on had bent so easily under pressure. The immediate problem had walked off the plane in handcuffs, more or less. But Amara Ellison understood, sitting alone in the dark of her private pod, as the engines began to spool up, that the real work had not even started yet. "David, I need you to wake up. We have a situation, and I need your full attention." The aircraft had leveled off over the dark expanse of the ocean, and while the rest of the cabin drifted into the hush of a night flight, Amara Ellison sat behind her closed partition with her laptop open and a satellite call connected to her chief legal officer, David Rourke. It was the middle of the night for him, and she could hear the rasp of sleep still in his voice, but he was already alert. He knew her well enough to know that she did not call in the small hours for anything small. She laid out the entire incident for him in precise, unhurried detail. The boarding line, the seat, the demand that she be moved, the word fraud in everything but name, the threat against Brenda's job, the laughter when she'd told him the truth, the removal. David, ever the lawyer, was fully awake by the end of it. "All right," he said. "First things first, the removal and the lifetime ban are airtight. He created a hostile environment, he used prejudiced language in front of dozens of witnesses, and he threatened a crew member. He can threaten to sue all he wants, he'll lose, and he'll lose badly. There's a passenger recording. I assume there's a recording?" Amara confirmed. "Then he doesn't have a case. He has a public relations disaster waiting to happen to himself. Honestly, Amara, from a legal standpoint, this is as clean as it gets. So, and I ask this gently because you never call me at 3 in the morning to tell me something is fine, why do I get the feeling that's not why you're calling?" Amara's fingers moved across her keyboard. "Because it's not," she said quietly. "I'm not worried about Roland Ashford suing us, David. I'm worried about who Roland Ashford is." "What do you mean? Some entitled frequent flyer? There are 1,000 of them." "There are," Amara agreed. "But this one isn't just a passenger." She had pulled up his profile in the airline's partner database, cross-referencing the membership number that had been on the boarding manifest. She read it off the screen, and as she did, her voice grew grim. "Roland Ashford is a senior executive at Apex Global Logistics. He runs their whole logistics division." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Apex," David said slowly. "You mean that Apex? The one that handles the ground operations at nearly every major airport we fly out of," Amara said. "The one with the $8 billion company behind them. The one whose contract with us is worth $3 billion and comes up for renewal in 5 weeks. She let that hang in the air for a moment. "The man who just stood in my cabin and told a black woman she didn't belong in first class is one of the most senior people at the single largest partner my airline has. And he had no idea who he was talking to." David was quiet for a long moment. "Amara," he said finally, and his voice had changed, gone careful. "This could be very bad or very good depending entirely on how you decide to play it. Their renewal negotiation is coming up. We've been looking for leverage to renegotiate some of the terms for months. If you wanted to, you could—" "This isn't about leverage," David Amara said, and there was steel in it. "I don't care about squeezing a better rate out of them. This is about something else, something worse. It's about where a man like that comes from." She stood the question up in the dark of her pod like a lamp. Think about it. The sheer confidence he had, the absolute certainty that if he yelled loud enough, everyone in that cabin would fall in line and do what he wanted. That kind of arrogance doesn't come from nowhere, David. It doesn't grow in a vacuum. It's fed. It comes from a place where a man learns over and over that he can treat people however he likes and never face a consequence. It comes from a culture that protects him, She was typing again, faster now, pulling up files. And that culture, she went on, has been in daily contact with my employees on the ground at every airport we serve for the better part of a decade. Apex handles our baggage, our loading. Our ground crews work shoulder to shoulder with theirs every single day. She scanned the reports flooding onto her screen. I'm looking at the complaint logs, David. Our ground staff filing reports about Apex managers. And there are dozens of them. Over just the last year. An Apex supervisor screaming at one of our baggage handlers. An Apex manager using slurs. Our people being belittled, threatened, talked down to. And do you know what we did with every single one of these complaints? We filed them, Amara said bitterly. We treated each one as an isolated incident, a one-off, a personality conflict. We never once stepped back and looked at the whole picture. We never asked whether all these separate little fires might actually be one big one. She closed her eyes for a moment. We've been fools, David. I've been a fool. I built a company on the promise that people would be treated with dignity. And I let a partner walk all over my own staff for years because I never connected the dots. David let out a slow breath. So what do you want to do? Amara opened her eyes. In the dark of the pod, the glow of the laptop lit her face, and her expression was set with a hard, clear resolve. I want to know who Roland Ashford answers to, she said. I want the name and the private number of the person who runs Apex Global Logistics, and I want him on a video screen the moment my wheels touch the ground in London. I don't care what time it is where he is going to take my call. Tom, you are not going to believe what these people just did to me. While Amara's plane carried her east across the ocean, Roland Ashford stood in the harsh fluorescent glare of the airport terminal, released from the security office with a citation for disorderly conduct and nowhere to go. His London flight was gone. His name was now flagged on the airline he'd flown for 11 years. And he was working the phones like a man possessed, calling every contact he had, every favor he was owed, every junior executive he'd ever taken to a ball game or bought an expensive dinner. Some lunatic on the flight, he raged into the phone, pacing back and forth past a shuttered coffee stand. Some woman claiming she owned the whole airline. Can you believe that? And the crew believed her. They dragged me off the plane like a criminal. Me. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? I need you to make some calls. I need this fixed. I need that flight crew's names, and I need them gone, and I need whoever that woman was. He spent the better part of an hour like that, demanding, threatening, calling in every debt, insisting again and again that he was the victim, that he had been wronged, that someone was going to pay for the indignity that had been visited upon him. What Roland Ashford did not understand, what he was constitutionally incapable of understanding, was that with every single call he made, he was digging his own grave a little deeper. The junior executives he was calling were terrified, not of him, of what he was saying, of being caught anywhere near it. And so one by one, quietly, they were forwarding his unhinged voicemails and his furious texts up the chain away from themselves until a growing file of his own panicked, threatening words was assembling itself in exactly the place he least wanted it to go. By the time Amara's plane was halfway across the ocean, a complete record of Roland Ashford's meltdown was sitting in her legal team's inbox, forwarded and time-stamped and utterly damning. He thought he was fighting back. He was only handing them the rope. Back on the plane, Amara had one more thing to do before she would let herself rest. She reached up and pressed the call button. Brenda appeared a moment later, and it was clear she had been crying. Her eyes were red, her face blotchy, her professional composure hanging by a thread. "You called Ms. Ellison," she said, her voice small. "Brenda, please, sit down." Amara gestured to the ottoman across from her pod. Brenda perched on the very edge of it, wringing her hands, unable to meet Amara's eyes. "Ms. Ellison, I don't have the words. I can't apologize enough. I panicked. He was a top-tier member, and those complaints, they can end you. They've ended people I know, and I saw the hoodie, and I made an assumption. A terrible one, a prejudiced one. There's no excuse for it. When we land, I'll hand in my resignation. You won't have to ask." Amara studied her for a long moment. "You did make an assumption," she said finally. "You looked at a passenger and you decided in a split second that she mattered less than the man screaming at her. You failed to protect someone who had done nothing wrong. And worst of all, You were about to punish the victim to appease the aggressor, which is the exact opposite of everything your training tells you to do. She paused. All of that is true, and you need to hear it. Brenda nodded miserably, tears sliding down her cheeks. Yes, ma'am. But Amara continued, and her voice softened. You're also right about why you did it. You weren't afraid of him, not really. You were afraid of the way things work. You were afraid because somewhere along the way this company, my company, taught you that a platinum card is worth more than your own good judgment. That the loud, powerful passenger always wins, that protecting yourself meant folding. She leaned forward. You didn't build that fear, Brenda. I did. I built the machine that put you in that impossible position tonight, so the question I have to ask myself isn't whether to fire you, it's how to fix the thing that broke you. Brenda looked up, her eyes wide and wet and confused. Ms. Ellison, I'm not firing you, Brenda. You're not— No, Amara said. I'm promoting you. When we land, you're grounded, but not as a punishment. For the next several weeks, you are going to be the co-leader of a new project. I'm calling it the Meridian Dignity Initiative. And your job, your first and most important job, is to take what happened on this flight tonight, every humiliating second of it, and use it to rebuild our training from the ground up. You are going to take 19 years of experience and the hardest night of your career, and you are going to make absolutely certain that no crew member of mine is ever again put in the position you were put in tonight. Do you understand what I'm asking you to do? Brenda was crying openly now, but it was a different kind of crying, and she nodded and nodded again, unable to speak for a moment. Yes, she finally managed. Yes, Ms. Ellison, I will. I promise you I won't let you down. Thank you. Thank you so— Don't thank me, Amara said, but not unkindly. She almost smiled. Go back to work. We've got a lot to fix, you and I, and it starts the moment we land. Amara, it's already everywhere. I don't think you understand how big this has gotten. Flight 214 touched down at London under a gray, drizzling dawn, and the moment the seatbelt sign chimed off, Amara's phone lit up with a call from David Rourke. But it wasn't the Apex situation he was calling about, not yet. It was something else entirely, something that had gotten out of everyone's control while the plane was over the ocean. Mateo Reyes, the blogger, in the row beside seat 3B, had not been idle during the flight. He had edited his footage into a tight 90-second clip, and the moment the plane's wireless connected on descent, he had uploaded it. He had given it a simple, devastating title. Man tries to kick black woman off first-class flight. Turns out she owns the airline. The video was pure, uncut drama. It opened on Roland Ashford's face, contorted with rage, his finger jabbing through the air, his voice booming someone like her. It captured his cruel, mocking laughter when Amara told him the truth, and then it captured the reversal, the whole cinematic collapse of it, the captain's face changing, the color draining out of Roland's, the pathetic pleading, the walk of shame down the aisle. It was in 90 seconds one of the most satisfying things anyone on the internet had seen in months. By the time Amara walked off the jet bridge, the video had 12 million views. By the time she reached the airline's London offices an hour later, it had 60 million. The clip was everywhere. It was on every news channel, every morning show, every corner of every social platform. Roland Ashford's face was frozen mid-sneer on screens around the world, his name becoming shorthand for entitlement and prejudice. And Amara Ellison, by contrast, was being celebrated. The quiet woman in the gray hoodie who hadn't raised her voice, who hadn't lost her composure, who had simply told the truth and let a bully destroy himself, had become an overnight symbol. People were calling her the most graceful takedown they'd ever witnessed. They were sharing the clip with captions about dignity and karma and grace under pressure. Amara's communications team was in a full-blown panic when she walked into the London office, phones ringing off the hook, media requests by the thousands. A junior staffer nearly dropped her coffee at the sight of the chief executive walking in wearing the same gray hoodie from the now famous video. Amara set down her satchel, poured herself a cup of tea, and listened to her head of communications lay out the crisis in increasingly frantic terms. When he finally paused for breath, she gave a single, calm instruction. Lean into it. Her communications head stared at her. I'm sorry, Ms. Ellison. Lean into it. The clip is a sensation. The stock could get volatile. We should be trying to calm this down, control the message, keep our heads down until it blows over. The market gets nervous when it doesn't understand what's happening, Amara said. So let's help it understand. Draft a statement. Confirm everything in that video is exactly what it looks like. Confirm my identity. Confirm Mr. Ashford's behavior. Confirm that he has been permanently banned from this airline for life. She took a sip of her tea. And then add one more line. Ma'am, add this. At Meridian Global, our cabins are a safe place for every single passenger, no matter their race, their background, or the clothes on their back. We have zero tolerance for the kind of treatment shown in this video. She paused, and her eyes were cold and clear. And then add this standard applies to everyone we do business with, including our corporate partners. Her communications head went still. Ms. Ellison. That last line, that sounds pointed. People are going to read that as a message aimed at someone specific. It is aimed at someone specific, Amara said quietly. Send it exactly as I said it. The statement went out an hour later, and that final line dropped into the business world like a stone through glass. This standard applies to our corporate partners. Every journalist covering the story read it and immediately began asking the obvious question, which partner? It took them less than an hour to find the answer. Roland Ashford, Senior Executive, Apex Global Logistics, Meridian's largest ground operations contractor. And then the second wave hit. By mid-morning, Apex Global Logistics issued its own statement, hastily and under obvious duress, announcing that it had terminated its senior logistics executive effective immediately for gross misconduct and a flagrant violation of the trust of a key client. They distanced themselves from him in the strongest possible terms. They called his behavior unacceptable and unreflective of their values. It didn't matter. The connection had been made and the internet does not forget. Apex Global's stock when the markets opened did not merely wobble. It fell off a cliff. Down 12% in the first minutes of trading, down 20%, down 35% by the end of the first hour, billions of dollars in value evaporating as investors fled a company whose name was suddenly inextricably linked to the most viral display of prejudice in recent memory. Roland Ashford, who had finally made it home to his comfortable suburban house after a long and humiliating night, woke to a phone vibrating itself off the nightstand and a life that had already ended without his noticing. Sit down, Mr. Hoffman. We have a great deal to discuss. The morning after the flight, in a glass-walled conference room high above the London streets, Amara Ellison sat at the head of a long oak table and watched three people from Apex Global Logistics file in and take their seats at the far end, as far from her as the room would allow. At the center of them was Gerald Hoffman, the chief executive of Apex, a man in his 60s who looked as though he had aged a decade overnight. His suit was immaculate, but his face was gray and drawn, the face of a man who had spent the last 24 hours watching his company's value bleed away in real time. To his left sat a severe woman who introduced herself as Dr. Eleanor Vance, Apex's newly appointed head of ethics and compliance, a role that had apparently existed for all of about 6 hours. To his right sat a nervous younger man in an expensive suit, whom Hoffman introduced as David Mercer, the executive he was proposing to install as Roland Ashford's replacement. Miss Ellison Hoffman began, his voice unsteady. First, let me say how deeply, profoundly sorry we are. What happened on that flight was monstrous. It does not reflect our values. Roland Ashford is gone, terminated, effective immediately. His name is being scrubbed from every account. I want you to know we are treating this with the utmost seriousness. I'm sure you are, Amara said. Given what's happened to your stock price, Hoffman winced. We've prepared a plan to make this right. He opened a leather folder with shaking hands. We have termination notices for the 17 managers named in the complaints your team flagged. We have a proposal for revised contract terms very favorable to Meridian to reflect our regret. And of course, we've brought Mr. Mercer here as Roland's replacement. He's one of our very best, top of his class, an excellent record, tremendous experience running our operations overseas. We think he can steady the ship and rebuild the trust between our companies. Amara let him finish. Then she folded her hands on the table. That's a very thorough plan, Mr. Hoffman, she said. I'll read the contract terms later, but first I want to talk about Mr. Mercer. The young man straightened slightly, trying for a confident smile. It's an honor, Ms. Ellison. I want you to know I take this responsibility very— You're Roland Ashford's brother-in-law? Amara said. The words dropped into the room and the temperature fell with them. David Mercer went rigid, the color draining from his face. Gerald Hoffman turned to stare at him, jaw slack. What Hoffman whispered— Mr. Mercer is married to the sister of Roland Ashford's wife, Amara, said her voice level and precise. They've been family for years. They vacation together. Your two families have been building this cozy little arrangement of yours for the better part of a decade. She looked directly at Hoffman. You fired Roland Ashford this morning, and then you walked into my boardroom and tried to hand me his own brother-in-law, a man cut from the exact same cloth, raised in the exact same club, and you presented him as the solution. She let out a slow breath. Did you honestly think I wouldn't check? The air had gone out of the room entirely. Gerald Hoffman looked like a man who had just felt the floor drop away beneath him. David, he said hoarsely, turning to Mercer. Is this true, David? Mercer opened his mouth and then, seeing that there was no lie that could save him, closed it again. He gave a small, sick nod, his career visibly evaporating in front of him. Amara rose slowly from her chair. I want to be very clear about something she said, walking slowly down the length of the long table. Last night on my own airplane, in a cabin I designed with my own 2 hands, a man decided I was worth less than the seat I was sitting in. And this morning, in my own boardroom, I watched a company try to solve the problem of one bully by quietly slotting in another one who happens to share his last holidays. Her voice was not loud. It never rose above conversational. But it filled the room. You didn't come here to fix anything, Mr. Hoffman. You came here to manage me. You came here to make the right noises, install a familiar face, and wait for the storm to pass so everything could go back to the way it was. You thought I was a problem to be handled. Ms. Ellison, I swear to you I didn't know they were related. Then you should have, Amara said, stopping at the head of the table and turning to face him. Because that is exactly the point. The rot in your company isn't one man, it never was. It's a whole way of doing things where people like Roland Ashford are protected and promoted and surrounded by people just like them and never ever told no. Your plan doesn't touch that. Your plan just changes the name on the door. She placed both hands flat on the polished oak and leaned forward. So here's what's going to happen instead, she said. Your proposal is rejected. All of it. The revised contract terms, the reshuffling, all of it. That was the price you'd pay if I believed you were serious about changing. You've just shown me you're not. She slid a single sheet of paper down the length of the table toward Hoffman. This is the new arrangement. It is not a negotiation. Hoffman picked up the paper with trembling hands and read it. His face went from gray to white. You want to buy our ground operations? He said faintly. I want to buy the divisions that handle my airline's groundwork, Amara confirmed. All of it. Your equipment, your infrastructure, and most importantly, your people. The good ones. The baggage handlers and the ground crews. Your managers have been mistreating for years. I'm going to bring them in-house. They'll become Meridian employees. They'll get my company's pay, my company's benefits, my company's protection. And they will never again have to answer to a manager who thinks he can scream at them because of where they come from. But the price you're offering, it's a fraction of what those divisions are worth. They're worth a fraction of what they used to be, Amara said quietly. Your brand is toxic now, Mr. Hoffman. Your stock is in free fall. Your board is probably drafting the statement announcing your departure as we speak. This is not me raiding your company. This is me offering you the only lifeline you're going to get. She straightened. You can take my offer and salvage something, or you can watch me hand this contract to one of your competitors this afternoon, walk away, and let Apex collapse under the weight of what your executives built. That's the entire choice. Take your time. You have until the end of the day. Gerald Hoffman stared at the paper in his hands. He looked at Amara Ellison standing at the head of the table, calm and immovable, and he understood that he was not looking at a negotiating partner. He slumped in his chair like a man whose strings had been cut. My board will have to approve it, he said hollowly. They'll approve it, Amara said. Dr. Vance, you'll oversee the transition of personnel. You work for me now, in effect. and your very first task is to make sure that every single person who comes over from Apex to Meridian is vetted. I want every last man like Roland Ashford found and removed before he ever puts on one of my uniforms. Is that clear, Dr. Eleanor Vance?" Seeing in this the one thread of a future for herself, nodded quickly. "Perfectly clear, Ms. Ellison." "Good," Amara said. "Then we're done here. You all have a great deal of work to do." "Roland, what did you do?" That was the sound that greeted Roland Ashford as he stumbled down the stairs of his suburban home the morning after the flight. His wife Julia standing in the living room in her robe, phone in one hand, staring at the enormous television on the wall, where his own purple screaming face was being broadcast to the entire world on a morning news program. The days that followed were a demolition, and it happened faster than Roland could have imagined possible. His phone had hundreds of missed calls, none of them friendly. He tried to log into his work email and found his access revoked. He tried to check his stock options, the accumulated wealth of 2 decades at Apex, and found his accounts frozen pending review. Within 48 hours, he learned the full meaning of the clause buried in his own employment contract, the one that allowed the company to claw back his unvested shares in the event of gross misconduct that damaged the firm. Millions of dollars gone, his severance gone. He was not merely fired, he was radioactive. The news vans came next, parking on his manicured lawn, reporters swarming his front door, cameras trained on the windows. He became a prisoner in the very house his arrogance had paid for, unable to step outside without being filmed. He tried to give a statement once to explain, to spin it, and it only made things worse. The clip of him stammering about being confused and stressed went nearly as viral as the original, and the wreckage spread outward the way it always does. Julia Ashford sat on the boards of several prominent charities, a role that had defined her social life for years. Within a day, she had been quietly asked to step down from 2 of them. The gala invitations stopped, the friends stopped calling. The whole gleaming social world the Ashfords had spent decades constructing simply evaporated the way morning fog burns off, leaving nothing behind. When Roland finally tried to talk to his wife to explain himself, she looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Not anger, something colder, something final. "You did all of this," she said quietly, "because you couldn't stand to sit next to a woman for a few hours? Because of the color of her skin? That's what you burned our entire life down for, Roland? That's it. That's the whole reason." She shook her head slowly. "I want a divorce. I want you out of this house. I can't look at you." His marriage, his fortune, his career, his reputation, all of it gone in less than a week. All of it traceable back to 15 minutes in a first-class cabin when he decided that a stranger didn't deserve her seat. But while one life was being torn down, another kind of work was quietly being built. At Meridian Global, the Dignity Initiative was already changing things. Brenda Callahan, still stunned to find herself leading it, threw herself into the work with a convert's zeal. She traveled to airport after airport, hub after hub, standing in front of rooms full of flight crews, and she did the bravest thing Amara had ever asked of anyone. She showed them the video. Her video. The one where she had folded, where she had been about to move the wrong person, where she had failed. And she stood there in front of her peers and said, "Look at my face in this moment. That is the face of fear. Fear of the wrong person. I let a shiny card make me forget my own humanity, and I nearly did something I could never have taken back. I am here to make sure it never happens to any of you." Grown flight attendants wept in those sessions. Crews that had grown cynical after years in the industry found something rekindled in them. The training Brenda built was not a lecture, and it was not a checklist. It was a story, a real one, told by someone who had lived it, and it landed in a way no slideshow ever could. The former Apex ground crews came over to Meridian, and their transformation was just as real. New uniforms in Meridian's deep blue that they wore with visible pride. A 35% pay increase, real benefits. Managers who had been trained under Brenda's new program, who understood that leadership meant protection, not intimidation. The abusive supervisors who had ruled over them for years were gone, vetted out by Dr. Vance's transition team before they ever crossed over. At the airports where these crews worked, something no report could have predicted began to happen. Efficiency scores rose, safety numbers improved, and the daily texture of the work, the thing that never showed up in any chart, simply became human again. Amara had not just cut out a tumor, she had grown something healthy in its place. "Excuse me, you're... Oh my goodness, you're her, aren't you? You're Amara Ellison." 8 months after the flight that changed everything, Amara Ellison walked through the same international terminal where the whole story had begun. But this time, she was not invisible. This time, as she made her way toward the gate, passengers turned to look. Some nodded, some smiled, a few quietly even applauded as she passed, a soft ripple of recognition following her through the concourse. She was no longer incognito, and there was a certain freedom in that, though she found she missed the anonymity a little. The gray hoodie had become something of a legend, and she had retired it mostly. Today she wore a simple, elegant coat, and she carried the same worn leather satchel she'd had for years. Some things she would never give up. She was boarding Flight 214 again, the same route, and she had quite deliberately booked herself into seat 3B. At the gate, a young agent she didn't recognize looked up, saw her, and broke into a wide, delighted smile. "Ms. Ellison," he said, "it's an honor, truly. Enjoy your flight." "Thank you," Amara said warmly, and meant it. She walked down the jet bridge into the first-class cabin, and at the door a flight attendant greeted her with a smile that reached all the way to her eyes. It was a young woman Amara hadn't met, freshly through the new training program, and the warmth in her welcome was genuine and unforced. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Ellison," she said. "Can I bring you anything before we push back? A glass of champagne, perhaps?" "That would be lovely," Amara said. "Thank you." She settled into 3B, the same seat, feeling the strange weight of the memory settle around her and then dissolve. A few moments later, a man sat down in 3A, the seat that had once belonged to Roland Ashford. He was young, in his late 20s, with warm brown skin and an anxious energy about him. He was clutching a laptop bag to his chest like a life preserver, and he kept smoothing down the front of his shirt, as though he couldn't quite believe he was allowed to be there. He glanced over at Amara, did a double take, and his eyes went wide. "Oh," he breathed. "Oh, wow. You're Amara Ellison. From the Everybody's Seen That Video. I can't believe I'm sorry, I'm being weird. I'm Diego. Diego Alvarez." Amara smiled, a real, full smile. "It's nice to meet you, Diego. What's taking you to London?" "My first investor pitch," he said, the words tumbling out. "I built a company, a small one, and I somehow got a meeting with people who might actually fund it, and I've never flown up front before in my life. I saved up. I wanted to feel, I don't know, ready, serious." He laughed nervously. "And now I'm terrified. I keep thinking they're going to take one look at me and decide I don't belong in the room." Something moved across Amara's face, something deep and knowing, an echo of a 26-year-old standing in an aisle with her face burning. "Diego," she said gently as the flight attendant arrived and set a glass of champagne in front of her. She lifted it. "You're on the right airline. We don't have any patience left for people who decide who belongs and who doesn't, and I'll tell you a secret." She leaned in slightly. "The people in that room are going to look at you and see exactly what you let them see. So walk in there like the seat is already yours. Because it is. You earned it. You saved for it. You built the thing that's carrying you into that room." She smiled. "Now, you've got a long flight ahead of you, and I've built more companies than I can count. Let's spend it getting you ready. Tell me about your pitch, from the beginning." Diego Alvarez's face lit up like the sun had come out. As the plane pushed back from the gate and began its long taxi toward the runway, Amara's phone buzzed once in her pocket. She glanced at it. A text from her father, Elias, retired now and living somewhere warm, watching all of it unfold from a distance. It was just a link to the famous video, followed by 3 words. "Taught you well." Amara smiled, slipped the phone away, and turned back to the nervous young man beside her, who was already deep into describing the company he'd built out of nothing. Outside the window, the city fell away, and the aircraft climbed into a clear sky. The seat that had once been used as a weapon against her now carried her forward. The airline that had almost failed the woman in the gray hoodie now welcomed the very people it had once been ready to turn away. She had not just kept her airline. She had made it at last into the thing she'd promised herself it would be, on a night long ago, when she was young and hurt, and certain of only one thing: that one day no one would ever again decide where she belonged just by looking at her. Roland Ashford's name became a cautionary tale. The last anyone heard the man who once ran a division of a multi-billion-dollar company, who flew across the world in first class and treated the people around him like furniture, was working a modest job, far from any airport, his fortune gone, his marriage over his arrogance, the only thing he had left to remember it all by. He had gambled his entire life on the belief that a stranger was beneath him. He had been wrong, and the bill had come due in full. Amara Ellison went on to build the Dignity Initiative into the standard the whole industry quietly began to copy, and Brenda Callahan, the flight attendant who had nearly failed on the worst night of her career, became the woman who taught thousands of others how not to. Some people are defined by their worst moment. Others are defined by what they choose to do about it. Brenda chose, and so did Amara, and so in the end did an entire company. Because true power was never the platinum card Roland carried, or the money or the volume of his voice in a crowded cabin. True power was the quiet a woman kept when a man screamed at her to get off a plane she owned. It was the character she refused to lower to meet his. It was a promise made by a hurt young woman decades ago and kept at last in a first-class cabin 35,000 feet over the ocean. So let me leave you with one last question, and I truly want to hear your answer. Have you ever been underestimated, judged, or told you didn't belong somewhere, only to prove them wrong? Share your story in the comments below, because someone reading it might need to hear it today. If this story moved you, do 3 quick things for me before you go. Tap that like button because it genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. Share this video with someone who needs the reminder that dignity is never about what you wear or where you come from. And if you're not already part of our family here, subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss what we release next. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Until next time, stand tall, stay kind, and never let anyone tell you where you belong.